Nigerians seems not to be giving attention to some crucial development that is happening in the country in the oil sector. Recently, Dangote Refinery made a publication notifying Nigeria that they will stop selling their products to Nigerians. They cited reasons such as the stoppage of the federal government, the NNPC, sales of crude oil to them for Naira. Naira for crude was an agreement that was reached between the Dangote Refinery and the NNPC when the refinery came on board initially. Nobody knew what happened. Nobody knew why the NNPC is stopping the initial agreement at this moment. Let it be on record that at the end of this, Nigerians will be at the receiving end. Inflation will skyrocket. The price of goods and services will skyrocket.
Well, let's start in Rivers State, where the sitting government has been suspended in contravention of Sections 305 of the 1999 Constitution. One of the reasons for that declaration of the state of emergency was due to critical pipelines being blown up. Now there's the imposition of the sole administrator. Kevin, how does this expose the vulnerabilities in the plan of the president to raise output to about 2 million barrels per day? And, where does this place the 2025 budget at this moment?
Oji, very, very important question you've asked. And the reason is because political risk is a major risk that investors consider when they want to locate an investment. There's usually, the PESO analysis, political, environmental, social, technology, legal, and economic framework that goes into the decision-making process for deciding to deploy capital. And, since that decision was made, there's been chatter from foreign portfolio investors who are concerned about the contagion risk that the situation in Rivers State might have. Section 305 is interesting. I was looking at Section 305 and I saw it says that the president might only invoke a state of emergency when the federation is at war, or where there is an invasion of the federation, or where the governor requests for the president with an approval of 2/3 majority of the State House of Assembly for a state of emergency to be imposed on the state. In all of the cases that we've seen in Rivers State, I'm not a political expert. I don't understand politics as much. And I'm a novice in that area, so I can't really speak to the facts because I don't have all the facts. But from all the things I've seen, none of these scenarios were actually met. The federation is not at war. There is no invasion of the federation. The governor of Rivers State, Siminalayi Fubara, who was suspended, did not request, because he was not even in speaking terms with the Rivers State House of Assembly, for the president to impose a state of emergency. So it beggars belief that because TNP pipe that is now being managed and owned by Renaissance Group, that finished the legal process for acquisition of shells, about 583 wells, 180 kilometers or 112 miles dimension of pipeline. It was, blown up, and then they had to, create like a redundancy. They use a redundancy, a 24 to 30 inch redundancy pipe that they had to take crude oil. Now that pipe can take about 450,000 barrels of crude oil from Lac Meters to Bonny River Terminal, which is an export terminal. So it's a major trunk line that controls about anywhere around 32% of Nigeria's daily output. So the reason why this is very disturbing is because it comes at a critical time in Nigeria's economic life cycle, where the government is doing all it can to try to revive oil and gas production. We can see the Six Sisters, the majors, have almost finished unbundling their assets onshore because of issues that they've had dealing on land, and they're going offshore. And indigenous companies that form what they call the Independent Petroleum Producers Group, IPPG, are buying off those assets. The president set up a committee late last year to look into the reconciliation with Ogoni people so that Renaissance can really operate a lot of their assets that are in Kana and Gokana local governments. And the NSA has been working to see how he can, charm and create peace so that the operators can go back in. So, trying to inflame the political environment in Rivers State, it couldn't have come at a worse time. Because, you're at 1.47, you're planning to do 2 million barrels in 2025 to fund your assumptions for the budget. $75 at strike price. I don't think it's going to stay at $72 or $75 for most of this year. Oil will stay below $70 for the most of this year because of the position that the U.S. government has taken on crude oil price and how it affects them, And you have a deficit of anywhere around 18 trillion naira. It just doesn't make any sense to me. It beggars belief.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. I get your point. I understand the concerns, but I also see that part of what you have not mentioned is the fact that the president could be considered to have been, to being proactive, given the fact that everything leading to last week Tuesday's proclamation showed clearly that there were subtle and direct threats and subtle threats to oil installations, to peace in Rivers State, some of which were somewhat attributed to the governor himself. I'm sure that you saw the video during the build-up to the threats that there could have been an impeachment of the governor. And part of what he said at a point when he went to commission something in Port Harcourt was to say that he was not afraid. The worst that could happen was for him to leave office, and that if it became necessary, he will send signal to the youths, veiled sort of message that people could misinterpret as threat to the safety and security of people on the one hand, and possibly safety and security of oil installations within his domain. The president made reference to that also in his address to the nation on Tuesday night. And so when he looked to the whole nation that the last resort was to declare state of emergency, don't you think that all he has done is to, as a matter of fact, safeguard the installations and protect the people of Rivers State from the horrible, likely horrible effect that would have happened if he had left the situation unattended to, especially at a time that there were threats of impeachment. And everything that we were hearing was that if Fubara, the governor, was removed, was that Rivers State will witness something terrible. And I think that that's the basis upon which the president acted. It's a different ballgame to try to interpret Section 305 of the Constitution as to whether the conditions that were required to meet declaration of state of emergency were met in full, and whether the president had the power to impose a sole administrator. But I think that what we may need to address will be that would it have been better to leave the situation the way it was, or ensure that Rivers State does not descend into a situation where nobody will even be able to get to up to 500,000 or 1 million barrels per day. Those are the concerns that I think that you should address in balancing and dimensioning the reasons why we got here.
Steve, the reason why I don't like discussing Nigerian politics is because 1 + 1 is not equal to 2. Okay? Let's be fair. Let's look at Lagos, for example. Lagos had the crisis in the State House of Assembly. There was invasion of State House of Assembly during session. They were going back and forth. At the end of the day, the president stepped in and called all the factions to the State House and sorted it out. And there has been calm. Even if there are, questions about how that plays out with the Constitution, and due process and all of that, I don't want to get into the details of that. So the question we should ask is, in the case of Rivers State, was there an opening or the option on the table of the president calling everybody to the table and saying, listen, guys, in the interest of Nigerian economy, this is what is at stake. We're trying to get output for crude oil and gas. Look, Steve, NLNG currently has 40% of their output out. And the reason they have it out is because gas feedstock supply to them has been so erratic. As a matter of fact, about 2-3 weeks ago, Tavares, that is a trading company in Europe, is one of the biggest LPG traders in Europe, got a court judgment against NLNG for about $380 million, 260 belonging to Glencore and about 120 belonging to Vitol. So what happened was Glencore and Vitol had paid Tavares they bought 19 cargoes for Tavares. Tavares had prepaid NLNG in forward sale contracts for those cargoes. Yeah? And because of force majeure, I think it was between 2020, I think it was 2020, because of force majeure, NLNG was not able to meet up with those obligations. And the case was taken to court in London in 2021. Tavares won. NLNG appealed. Tavares won the appeal. So $380 million if there is no transfer risk insurance, on those cargoes or those contracts, is going to have to be paid from the revenues that accrues to NLNG, of which Nigerian government owns 49%. So that will probably affect withholding, CIT, or most likely dividends that the government gets, So you call all the factions to the table and say, look at what is at stake. The economy is not doing very well. The budget deficit is large. The assumptions for the 2025 budget is already off because we don't even have the money to meet up, okay? So, and you have, I'll say anywhere around 500,000 barrels of Nigeria's output is already committed in forward sale agreements. As a matter of fact, the government is planning to take another forward sale agreement. I hear reliably that they might commit another $5.5 billion in a forward sale agreement, collect upfront cash, and pledge Nigeria's crude till 2034 for another 9 years. This is in addition to the about $14 billion that has been taken by the Nigerian government between 2019 until date. So if the president knows that this is what is at stake, is there a chance that he would have called for a political solution, called the governor, called the honorable minister,
Kevin,
and say,
he did.
We want you to sit down,
Kevin,
look at what is at stake,
Kevin,
and address this problem in the political...
But he did. He did intervene.
Steve, he should have called them again.
Hold on, Kevin. Let me just make a clarification. Just a minute, Kevin. The president did, and we all know what happened. He called everybody to Abuja. He also engaged Pandev, to intervene. And I'd like to say that I'm not sure if the comparison with what happened in Lagos is factual. There was no governor under threat of impeachment in Lagos State. No State House of Assembly was destroyed in Lagos State. Lagos State, there was no threat as to what could happen to oil installations, in the state. The governor was not given, any sort of threat whatsoever if something happened to his position. So I think that when we're comparing, I get the point that the president could have done better, but he did attempt, to put a political solution to it. It might not be enough, but again, let's be fair to everybody.
Yes, Steve, I'm being fair. That's why I said that the president is the leader. The president is a father figure. It is his role, because the buck stops on the table of the president. When at the level of the presidency, there are no excuses. There's nobody for the president to go and complain to. The buck stops at his table. So anything he needs to do as a father, to call everybody to the table and say, let us sort this out. And I'm telling you, we have to sort this out. If he has to call them 2 times, 3 times, that is the better option than to declare a state of emergency, send a sole administrator, then take the allocation of Rivers State that has been withheld and give it to the sole administrator. It doesn't exactly help the agitation that the people of Rivers State has, and also the people of Bayelsa State that happen to be Jaws, for which have been called minority, which I don't think they are. It doesn't exactly help the tension in the state. It doesn't help it. That's what I'm saying. But, Steve, I like to focus on economics and numbers because, like I said, politics it's strange to me. You know, when you add 1 plus 2, 1 plus 1 in Nigeria, it doesn't always equal 2. That's why I like to stay away from politics and focus on numbers, because that's what makes sense to me.
Kelvin, I mean, I totally understand what you what you mean there when you say sometimes 1 plus 1 is not equal to 2, and that is a never-ending conversation, as we've seen, because we've had such varying opinions on this particular issue where, you know, different people have different ways of analyzing it, and that's just, you know, politics. So let's get back to the economics. I want us to look at this from an investor standpoint. You know, do you think that this political crisis and insecurity is going to affect foreign investment in Nigeria's energy sector, especially as it pertains to investor apprehension? Basically, looking at, you mentioned, you know, the offshore increase in offshore activity, basically. Now, do you think this should also mean we begin to strengthen the offshore capacity that we have, specifically local capacity, strengthening offshore activities and local capacity? Because I know that we do have that. So what would be your response to that?
So, Kachi, thank you very much. If you look at the production by terrain basis, you have swamp. Swamp takes about 13%. You have onshore. Onshore takes about, land takes about 15%. Deep water takes about 25%. I think offshore, but not deep offshore inland takes anywhere around 21%, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe my numbers are off, or about 32%, if I'm not mistaken. So if you look at land and swamp as a contribution of production by terrain basis, they take about 28%. You know, so when investors are looking at the political situation in Rivers State, the contagion risk, and how it's likely going to affect maybe production numbers, and how those production numbers will be able to will affect the revenues the government gets, mostly from tax oil and royalty oil, because profit oil is already, you know, encumbered. I told you, I said that until date, 2019 till date, they've collected about $14 billion. Afrexim has contributed about $4.5 billion to that loans that NNPC has collected on behalf of themselves and the government. And they are planning to raise another forward sale agreement. And then the FPIs, the foreign portfolio investors who have been bringing in FX into Nigeria and using 1 year forwards as a hedge to, you know, manage risk, they are looking at it and telling themselves, okay, there's been FX reforms. They've migrated from managed floats to Nigerian foreign exchange markets, adopted a B matching system, which creates more transparency. There's been some improvements in the oil and gas sector, reforms, but not enough. There is a lot of issues that the system still has. There's an emerging midstream sector, because up until 2024, Nigeria didn't have a midstream sector. It had an up and downstream sector. Dangote came last year, and the midstream sector was created, you know. So there's been an inflow of investors coming into Nigeria, especially from the beginning of the last quarter of 2024. And the CBN has seen a surge of flows. How does it affect their outlook? It affects their outlook because they know that the Niger Delta contributes 80% of FX to Nigeria. And, you know, having increased volumes of FX that the central bank needs, I hear that they have about $3.2 billion in obligations, CBN, in their payment schedule. They have $400 million to IMF that is due. They have $1.2 billion in Eurobond yields. They have $2.4 billion that they are drawing down of FX forwards that is balanced from $7 billion of forwards that has been outstanding for about 3 to 4 years, that some companies have incurred billions of naira in overdraft charges, you know. So they have about $3.2 billion in schedules to pay this year that are coming due. I say anywhere between second and third quarter, they have to meet up with those obligations. And then some of the nairas that are gotten from, you know, making these obligations are going to be, you know, used to meet up with budget deficit financing in 2025 budget. So the investors are looking at the political situation, you know, and they are asking themselves, is it beyond repair? Can the government contain the political situation? Because if you ask anybody when we all said Happy New Year, that we'll be here today and Rivers State will have a sole administrator and not a governor, and militants will be back after anything around maybe 15 or 16 years, threatening to bomb oil installations, they will not believe it. It's because this is not part of what we were expecting. There was nowhere in the permutations and calculations of what might go wrong did we foresee that Cotton Channel was going to be blown out 60 meters to Bonny River Terminal, and the government is going to, a Renaissance team is going to have to go and then create an alternative for a redundancy pipe to take crude oil to terminal. You know, so it's a situation that is unfolding, and my take is the National Security Advisor and Presidency has to, you know, manage this thing very carefully, because it can undo a lot of progress that has been made so far.
Well, Kevin, I'm sure that they are listening, and I'm sure that is one of the primary assignment for the National Security Advisor at this moment. And I just wanted to make some more clarification. That you have stated that that trunk line, which was in jeopardy in Rivers State, produces about 32% of Nigeria's daily output. You know, many have said that the threat of danger is that the situation in Rivers imperils the entire Nigerian economy, which is fueled by oil and gas. And it brings me to my next question, which you have highlighted a little, but I want you to go deeper, about the contagion factor. The Rivers and Bayelsa State controls about 624,000 of that 1.4 million barrels that Nigeria currently drills daily. There's also Delta State. Now, the flip side of that conversation is that will there be a declaration of a state of emergency in those areas if they were threatened? I mean, I'd like for you to go deeper with that contagion factor and what the potential consequences will be, especially with foreign investors and production numbers and all.
Well, so, Oji, very, very strategic question you've asked. You see, there are over 2,600 shut-in wells in Nigeria. Shut-in wells are usually wells that are either temporarily or permanently sealed because of several factors, either because you're doing measurement and testing when you finish field development to ensure that there's proper calibration of wells and there's the right pressure, you know, or you're temporarily shutting it down because you're going to stop producing and you're going to leave, or you've reached a point with close to the end of the shelf life of a well, and then the OPEX, your operating expenditure, has gone higher than the unit cost of production, where it makes sense for you to continue to produce and make a profit. You see, the problem we have today is you have shut-in wells that has the capacity to add 900,000 barrels of crude to Nigeria's daily output as we have it today. And the fear is that if these boys go back, you know, and start their activities, these operators are going to run. There was a time when oil workers, before 2010, before oil workers that were coming to the Niger Delta, especially the ones that are non-Nigerians, they had to take life insurance, all kinds of insurance programs, you know, just because they're afraid that, you know, the risk is very heightened and they might not come back or they might be kidnapped, you know, all kinds of things. We don't want to go back to those dark days. So, for example, the question is, if it spreads into Bayelsa and then they start their activities and the companies that were giving pipeline security contracts are not able to contain them, is the president going to declare state of emergency in Bayelsa and Delta states too? This is the reason why I said it's better to nip it in the bud early than to cure it. Prevention is better than cure. If you call all the parties together to the State House and settle this issue politically, it will prevent escalation. And you know, when a fire starts, it's better to prevent the fire than start it and try to contain it, because when it starts, you don't have control of how far it can burn. You know, so you see, one of the and this is the reason why you have to commend the majors, the international oil companies, for their strategic foresight and vision. You know, they've been in this system for nearly 60 years, especially Shell. And they've practically seen that, look, it doesn't make any sense for them to stay onshore, on land or swamp. You know, all this kind of risk are risk. You can imagine just a few days, I think it was 1 or 2 days after Shell officially handed over, SPDC officially handed over to Renaissance, that TMP was blown up. You know, that channel that transports 450,000 barrels of crude on a daily basis. You know, so this is such a critical time in the history and in the economic life cycle of Nigeria. The president cannot afford this kind of events. This should not be what we should be discussing. Look, Guyana, I'll tell you this, Guyana achieved first oil only 5 years ago. Between 2020, COVID, and today, ExxonMobil has ramped up 660,000 barrels of crude, producing 3 different blends of crude oil in Guyana. Guyana went from 0 to 660,000 in 5 years. Nigeria has been at this for 57 years, and Nigeria is still at 1.47 million barrels. Nigeria is, you know, shutting on and up, is struggling to meet up. This month it will meet up with OPEC and cross by 40,000. Next month it will drop by another 70,000. Look, it should be a shame to us that in 57 years we're struggling with 1.47 when we should be at 10 million barrels per day. You know, we should be comparing ourselves to Russia and Brazil and the US, not Guyana. Guyana says that in the next 5 years, by 2030, they would have ramped up to 1.3 million barrels. Maybe by 2030, we'll still be struggling 1.8 million barrels a day. Because we're having to face issues like Niger Delta militancy that was solved by the late Umar Musa Yar'Adua, God bless his soul, 16 years ago. It doesn't make any sense.
All right, Kevin. Talking about critical times, let's talk a bit about the area that you're pretty much comfortable with. Talk to us about the decision of the Dangote Refinery lately to suspend the sale of petrol in local currency, basically in Naira. How did we get here? What's the implication for Nigerians who thought that the advent of the Dangote Refinery would be, you know, the big news for sales of petrol, diesel, etc. to them, given the fact that all we hear from NNPC, in spite of the repairs that they claim that they are doing, is that they were still importing like before. Why did Dangote suspend sales in local currency, and what is the broader implication for the country?
Steve, you know, since that program started in October 1 of 2024, they've been averaging anywhere around 110, 120,000 barrels per day in local currency. Then in January, it dropped to about 83,000 barrels per day. In February, it dropped to 61,000 barrels per day. Then in March, middle of March, it was stopped entirely. You know, I see the news. I see that people say, "Oh, Dangote is a monopoly. You know, he wants to take the entire market." Well, NNPC says they have refineries working. They borrowed $2.4 billion, you know, to Project Eagle in 2021, June 29, 2021. They were, you know, floated $1 billion in cash to do turnaround maintenance, and they staked Nigeria's crude oil through a for-sale agreement, crude oil swap. You know, they say they have 2 refineries working, Warri and Port Harcourt. So how is it that, you know, same actors that said that they have refineries working are saying that Dangote wants to take over the entire market? If you are really refining, why are you not refining? You are supposed to be a competition. As a matter of fact, NNPC owns shares in Dangote. You know, so why should it be a problem that Dangote has invested this money, has spent 7 to 8 years building the largest single train refinery in the world, and is currently doing 44 million liters of PMS, which is anywhere around 9 million liters higher than Nigeria actually consumes on a daily basis, and you're not able to give him crude feedstock, and he has to go and import crude oil from outside Nigeria. You know, in February, he imported more than 6 million barrels. This month of March, is landing nearly 10 million barrels to refine from outside Nigeria. How does it make sense that Nigeria, who is a major member of OPEC and a major oil-producing country, I think they are 12th or 13th largest producer in the world, right? You know, has his major refiner importing crude oil from outside the country to refine, and then he's bending over backwards because he's selling below Platts, You know, because when you do the calculation on how much it costs per metric ton of petrol, and you multiply it by 1,341 liters, which is how many liters of petrol you have per metric ton, then you divide it by the exchange rates, you see that what it was offering the market is actually well below Platts pricing system, which is a global benchmark for pricing PMS around the world. You know, it doesn't make any sense. And this also talks about the failure of leadership in the oil and gas sector. The fact that the regulator, NMDPRA, is not doing its job, has not done its job. NMDPRA does not have anything as little as a lab, you know, despite all the revenues it generates, you know, to at least test the products that are coming into Nigeria. You know, you said it, and there's evidence to show between last year, October 1 and date, they've imported 4.4 billion liters of PMS valued at about 6 trillion naira. NMDPRA does not have a lab to test the quality of product to be sure it meets up with the sulfur level as is stated in the PIA. So if, for example, you're even saying that, okay, just for example, okay, Dangote is not producing up to what the government claims Nigeria consumes a day. By the way, NMDPRA does not have a framework to actually measure daily consumption of petrol in Nigeria. They use projections for measurement. They don't have a framework, okay? If you say Dangote is not producing up to, and then you have to import the shortfall so that there is energy security, and the PIA says in sections 317.11 that every petrol that comes into Nigeria must meet up with a sulfur level of 50 parts per million, how is it that you don't have a lab to take a sample from the vessel before it docks to test to be sure that everybody has a level playing field? So Dangote is not held up to one standard, which is a very high standard that they are holding him up to. And then everybody else who is importing into Nigeria out of sympathy or maybe connivance is held to a different standard that is below the standard that the local refiner is held up to. You know, so there's been no leadership from the regulator. I don't know if it's because they didn't expect Dangote to succeed and he just came out of the scene and they were not prepared for it, or they just don't like him. Because it beggars belief that in 2025, we're importing crude oil, we're refining petrol, and then he's selling petrol in naira without a an active or a liquid forwards market for him to be able to hedge to prevent against volatility or risk of, you know, paying for dollar, selling in naira, and having to go back to the market to buy dollar to import crude. It just doesn't make any sense. So the decision he made to suspend the sale of petrol in naira is the right decision because the government has refused to come to the table to tell him how they are going to provide crude oil feedstock. It doesn't make sense that the government is planning to raise $5.5 billion from Saudi Aramco, yes, in a for-sale agreement to finance obligations that it has and pledge Nigeria's crude oil for the next 9 years when it doesn't have crude feedstock to refine and provide to Nigerians. Dangote should not carry the burden when the government is not willing to share risk.
So basically, what does that now mean for the idea of the Dangote Refinery being touted as the solution to Nigeria's energy independence, especially as it pertains to the downstream? You know, what does this mean for other marketers? Are we looking at another possible scarcity at the end of the day? Because obviously prices are going to go up and this is going to trickle down to the consumers, which also is always where this ends. It doesn't ever affect the two parties involved. It always trickles down to the final consumers.
Kachi, look, the implication of pricing going up is that, you know, you're going to see the demand, the implication of him saying that he's going to sell in dollars. You're going to see demand from marketers who buy from him for dollars in the market to get dollars they need to buy products from him. If that happens, the naira will drop. When naira drops, inflation continues to go up. You know, I've always said that I don't agree with the method of computation that MBS use for rebasing the cost price index, the basket. You know, I don't agree with it. I don't agree inflation is a little over 24%. I think inflation is still over 30%. So that's the number I'm going to use. Inflation continues up. The inflation to interest yield curve, the interest rates will stay high. And one telling reality of, to support the fact that, you know, CPI is not below 30% is the fact that since the CPI was rebased, the CBN Monetary Policy Committee, the Implementation and Technical Committee has refused to revise the interest rates down by cutting the interest rate significantly to around 20% because there's usually a 400 basis points inflation targeting basket. So if, for example, inflation is 24%, they will typically keep interest rates anywhere around 20%. They refuse to cut it. They've kept it that high and they've maintained it, you know. So the implication of him deciding to price in dollars is you're going to see like a pressure on the FX market. The pressure on the FX markets will translate to higher inflation, interest rates will stay high. It'll be difficult for you to get capital to the real sector to produce and create supply so that you can, you know, rejig the demand pull inflation cycle.
All right. I mean, this is a developing story. We hope that we hear some more positive news from the regulators as it pertains to Dangote Refinery suspending petrol sale in Naira.